In the American Civil War, Missouri was a border state that sent men, armies, generals, and supplies to both opposing sides, had its star on both flags, had separate governments representing each side, and endured a neighbor-against-neighbor intrastate war within the larger national war. By the end of the Civil War, Missouri had supplied nearly 110,000 troops to the Union and at least 30,000 troops for the Confederate Army and additional bands of pro-Confederate guerrillas. There were battles and skirmishes in all areas of the state, from Iowa and the Illinois border in the northeast to the edge of the state in the southeast and southwest on the Arkansas border. Counting minor engagements, actions and skirmishes, Missouri saw over 1,200 distinct fights. Only Virginia and Tennessee exceeded Missouri in the number of clashes within the state's boundaries. The first major Civil War battle west of the Mississippi River was on August 10, 1861 at Wilson's Creek, Missouri, while the largest battle west of the Mississippi River was the Battle of Westport at Kansas City in 1864. Pre-war Missouri Compromise. Missouri was initially settled by Southerners coming up the Mississippi River and Missouri River. Many brought a few slaves. Missouri entered the Union in 1821 as a slave state following the Missouri Compromise of 1820, in which Congress agreed that no other territory north of 36°30' could enter the Union as a slave state. Maine entered the Union as a free state in the compromise to balance Missouri. Bleeding Kansas. One of the biggest concerns for Missouri slaveholders was a federal law that decreed that if a slave physically entered a free state, the slave became free. The Underground Railroad, a system of safe houses, through which runaway slaves gained their freedom by heading north, was already established in the state. The slave owners were worried about the possibility of the entire western border becoming a conduit for the Underground Railroad, if those territories were made free states. In 1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act nullified the Missouri Compromise and said the two states could choose to enter as a free or slave state. The result was a de facto war between pro-slavery residents of Missouri and Kansas Territory's free staters to influence how Kansas entered the Union. Most conflicts involved attacks and murders of supporters of both sides, with the sacking of Lawrence by pro-slavery forces and the Pottawatomie Massacre by John Brown the most notable. Kansas initially approved a pro-slavery constitution called the Lecompton Constitution, but, after the U.S. Congress rejected it, the state approved a free state Wyandotte Constitution. Dred Scott decision. Against the background of Bleeding Kansas, the case of Dred Scott, a slave who in 1846 sued in St. Louis, Missouri, for his freedom as he had been taken to a free state, reached the U.S. Supreme Court. In 1857, the Supreme Court ruled not only that slaves were not automatically made free simply by entering a free state, but, more shockingly, that no one of African ancestry could be considered a U.S. citizen and thus had no standing. African Americans could not initiate legal action in any court, even when they clearly had what would otherwise be a valid claim. The decision calmed the skirmishes between Missouri and Kansas partisans, but it enraged abolitionists and increased the vitriolic rhetoric that soon led to the Civil War. Pony Express. With war storm clouds brewing in 1860, the government sought to communicate more quickly with San Francisco, California. In 1860, it took 25 days for a message to reach the coast from Missouri. The firm of Russell, Majors and Waddell proposed to do it in 10 days with a relay system of horses from what was then the furthest west terminus of a railroad at St. Joseph, Missouri. The resulting Pony Express began operations on April 3, 1860. Ulysses S. Grant's first commission in the Civil War was to protect the Hannibal and St. Joseph Railroad, which was delivering its mail. Armed neutrality. By 1860, Missouri's initial southern settlers had been supplanted with a more diversified non-slaveholding population, including many Northerners, German and Irish immigrants. With war seeming inevitable, Missouri thought it could stay out of the conflict by remaining in the Union, but staying neutral, not giving men or supplies to either side and pledging to fight troops from either side who entered the state. The policy was first put forth in 1860 by outgoing Governor Robert Marcellus Stuart, who had Northern leanings. It was notionally reaffirmed by incoming Governor Claiborne Jackson, who had Southern leanings. Jackson, however, stated in his inaugural address that in case of federal coercion of Southern states, Missouri should support and defend her sister Southern states. A constitutional convention to discuss secession was convened with Sterling Price presiding. The delegates voted to stay in the Union and supported the neutrality position. In the United States presidential election, 1860, Abraham Lincoln received only 10% of the state's votes, while 71% favored either John Bell or Stephen A. Douglas, both of whom wanted the status quo to remain, with the remaining 19% siding with Southern Democrat John C. Breckinridge. Missouri demographics in 1860. According to the 1860 U.S. Census, Missouri's total population was 1,182,012, of which 114,931 were slaves. Most of the slaves were in rural areas rather than cities. Of the 299,701 responses to occupation, 124,989 listed farmers, and 39,396 listed farm laborers. The next highest categories were laborers, blacksmith, and merchants. Less than half the state was listed as native-born. Those coming from other states listed Kentucky, Tennessee, Virginia, Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois, with lesser amounts from other states. 906,540 were listed as being born in the United States. Of the 160,541 foreign-born residents came from the German states, Ireland, England, France, and Switzerland, with lesser amounts from other countries.